What's up guys, it's Louis here from SHS Gaming. I hope you're all doing well. I've got a very exciting video for you all today as I've spent the last 7 days testing out the brand new Call of Duty Vanguard that sent us back to World War II again. So I'm going to give you a bit of an insight into my thoughts on this new game, including things I've noticed in the last week or so, and show you some gameplay and give you some top tips for those of you looking to get into the Call of Duty franchise, or for those of you who might already have the game. Now I've been playing this on the PS5, and as any of you with a PS4, PS5 or console or PC for that matter may know, before you get to play you've got the download and installation process to look forward to, along with any major game updates. Now as of today, with a few updates, the game is currently sitting at 75 gig on the PS5, which in total took about 3 to 4 hours to download and install for us, but of course this all depends on where you are and how quick your internet speed is. If your internet speed is slow, this game could take well over a day, if not longer, to download and install after purchasing. Anyway, as I mentioned, in Vanguard we returned back to World War II, so if you spent a lot of time playing the Call of Duty franchise over the years like I have, this did make it a little hard to get super excited for this new release. So I kicked off with the online multiplayer as I had to download the campaign separately after already installing and updating the base game, which was a bit annoying, but I think that shows that the game creators are well aware that fewer people tend to play campaigns these days and opt for online instead. Now anyway, enough of that, let's jump straight into the game and start getting a closer look at the multiplayer mode. Now if you are familiar with the more recent Call of Duty games, you'll notice we have a very similar interface. We've got our list of menus where we can jump into a variety of games, edit our loadouts, play with different operators, different challenges, view the barracks where we can check out our stats, and of course we've got the store where we can purchase new items. So let's head straight into some games and talk about my first impressions. Now first things first, I think the game looks and sounds incredible. In my opinion, the variation of maps play really well, and as you would expect, the graphics, the effects and the animations are all super immersive. Now one thing I really liked was the addition of some destructible environments, which are relatively new to the franchise, and the interactive maps that we have seen in previous games all help to keep the game dynamic and different every time. These interactive map elements give players the option to create their own path by shooting through breakable elements, opening and closing doors and windows, and so on. And of course, it goes without saying, being a World War II game, we see the reintroduction of the old style weapons, which I personally really enjoy using. I'm definitely more a fan of the boots on the ground Call of Duty games other than previous versions such as Black Ops 3 and Infinite Warfare, and I far prefer using the older guns that recoil in comparison to futuristic weapons firing lasers and all that sort of thing. Another cool new feature in multiplayer mode is combat pacing, which lets you choose the rough player count for each different mode. So essentially you've got 3 pacing levels. You've got tactical, assault and blitz. So you get a lower player count in tactical, which gives the feeling of like a Counter-Strike feel, and then you get anything between 16 and 48 players in blitz. So that brings more intense action and the potential for huge kill streaks. Now I like to let the game just cycle through the different levels, which adds a nice bit of variety to your gameplay and keeps things different. Similar to a new FIFA game every year, the fundamentals of each Call of Duty remain exactly the same, playing against others from across the globe in a variety of different game types to achieve the objective. So if you have never played a game of Call of Duty before, then don't feel like you're too late to get started. And because the game employs a skill-based matchmaking system, you'll be playing online against players of a similar level and ability, which hopefully means you'll be staying competitive all of the time. Now I do think that there's a good chance that hardcore COD players won't be huge fans of this game, as you do have to adjust your playstyle from the Warzone game engine and live with the more difficult to control recoil in the World War II guns, but personally I feel this has brought back some of the best parts of the old World War II era in COD, as well as adding some great new features. I think it gives old school players like me a sense of nostalgia and would be a good starting point for new players to get used to the game. On the whole, multiplayer is a lot more forward thinking than campaign, which I'll come back to in a bit, but all of the smaller changes come together to make this pretty different from previous years. Okay, let's chat zombies then. As someone who bought Call of Duty Cold War for the zombies, I can say with confidence that this variation of zombies is one of the best I've ever seen. They've got the same mechanics from the Cold War Zombies Outbreak mode, but with a fresh layout and some much needed adjustments. So you begin in a central defensive area where you can upgrade your equipment and strike out on different missions, each more difficult than the last. As you get through more missions, your central area will become under a more and more intense undead assault until you either decide to extract from the location or become overwhelmed. Overall, an exceptionally fun way to kill time. I'm very aware that some people hate the zombie aspect, so if it's not for you, then it's not for you, but for those of you guys who are really into zombies, I think you're going to really enjoy this one. Let's cover the campaign last then. So this feels like something straight out of a Michael Bay movie. It's your classic American action movie where the protagonist charges into a hail of bullets and explosions only to come out with a slightly bloodied screen. The story focuses on a small group of special operatives from the Allied nations, which are pretty stereotypical to say the least, although I do think the characters are better than normal. You're kind of forced to delve deep into the backstories of all the characters, which some people might not like, but personally I think is quite a cool aspect of the game. It's a pretty interesting setup, following this group through Berlin in quite an unexplored area of the war, but the reality isn't quite that exciting. You end up spending a lot of time imprisoned, and it all goes back to feeling pretty familiar. I won't give away all of the storyline, but on the whole, I think there's potential behind this campaign. I'm just not quite sure they fully pulled it off. I think it's more setting it up for a sequel. Maybe that's where the real excitement and cool concepts will come together. All in all, a decent if predictable campaign. So moving on to some top tips then. I've spent a lot of time in the settings on this particular Call of Duty game, and I've got some top tips to share with you guys that should help to improve your experience and make you far more competitive right from the outset. Now admittedly, before we get into this is one of, if not the most complex and comprehensive menu settings I think I have ever seen in a Call of Duty game ever. So we're not going to go through every last setting in detail, but I will go over everything briefly and highlight what I would recommend changing and adjusting so you can start getting more competitive immediately. And just a disclaimer, this is for console players because we have the PS5 with us, but if you are on PC, there will still be a couple of useful insights here for you guys too. And one last thing, these changes are about giving you advantages to be better at the game. If you're after an as realistic as can be, if that's even possible, playing experience, then these settings are not for you. This is purely about giving you an advantage over other players. Okay, so firstly, we're going to set all of our settings back to default, so now the game looks exactly how it looks when you fire it up for the first time. Okay, so if we head into the settings under controller settings and under the heading controller, a number of these settings are going to be personal preference, so we're not going to touch too much on these. Now sensitivity is fairly straightforward, so you need to adjust these as you wish. I'd recommend trying out a few games with some different sensitivities and see what works best for you. I've got mine set at 6 and 7, but just to demonstrate, if I crank this all the way to 20, you can see how quickly I move. Ground, air and ADS sensitivity multiplier we'll leave at 1, and custom sensitivity per zoom I'm going to leave as off rather than change them individually, which changes the sensitivity per zoom, so if you're using a sniper scope and so on. Button layout I'm leaving as default, but you choose to set this as you wish. Vertical aim on foot is standard, ground vehicles and air vehicles as standard, but the aim response curve I'm going to change to dynamic, as this is what I'm used to using. Basically, this setting adjusts the interaction between your analog sticks and the response you get to see inside the game. Each aim response curve setting uses a different algorithm that creates different results while running and gunning. So for most players, the standard option is fine, but I've selected dynamic as that's what I'm used to using, so I'm going to stick with that. I recommend trying standard and dynamic and seeing what works best for you. It's not exactly a setting that will necessarily make you any better, but rather something that you can change up if you're new to COD and just see what works best. Now onto the controller vibration, trigger effect and weapon fire threshold, I have these all off. Vibration is just distracting and unnecessary and can influence your shot, and weapon fire threshold, if turned on, means that some guns might require you to press down further on your fire button to fire the gun, which I definitely don't want. Regardless of what gun I use, I want the threshold to be the same for every gun. Under advanced controls, these are basically personal preference, so nothing much to talk about here. ADS sensitivity transition timing is when the sensitivity changes between hip firing to aiming down sight, and I have that set as instant. ADS sensitivity multiplier I have on 1, and then the rest I leave alone, but I do just want to highlight the dead zones. Over time your controller wears away and you begin to notice that you may need to pull down on the triggers more or move the sticks further before the game registers that action. Now dead zones adjust the range where the action will not be considered. So a larger dead zone means you need to make more of a movement for the game to respond to it. Now what you choose depends on your controller, but you want these as low as possible whilst ensuring there is no movement when you are not touching the controller. And I'd recommend leaving the maximums at 99. Moving over to gameplay now, and target aim assist you definitely want on. I leave the assist mode as default, and if you're new to the game I would recommend doing the same. ADS aim assist is only for campaign or zombies, so you may as well just leave this on. Weapon mount activation I leave as default, which is ADS and melee, and the mount movement exit is on. Depleted ammo switch is an interesting one, and again, personal preference. I prefer to have this off because I've played the game for a long time. I prefer to manually switch to my secondary weapon when my primary has run out of ammo, rather than letting the game do it for me automatically. But if you are new to the game, this might be worth leaving on, so there's one less thing to think about, but for me, I want that off. Blind fire again is personal preference, but we'll leave this on and I'll show you guys what it can do. So if you can see here, we stand behind a wall, we press R2, we peek the corner whilst firing, rather than having to move around the wall and then start shooting. So I'm going to leave this on. Under movement, I leave automatic airborne mantle on, partial grounded mantle on, and auto ground mantle off, stance queuing on, auto sprint off, auto move forward off, and sprint cancels reload on. So with sprint cancels reload, if you're reloading and someone starts shooting, you naturally want to sprint away. So I want this to cancel the reload action, as I do this all the time to get out of some tricky situations. And I leave sprint and door bash on, which means you can run through certain elements in the game. Now under action behavior, I prefer tap to slide, as it's quicker than holding. So if you see here, if I run, all I need to do is tap circle and slide rather than holding it, which takes a little longer. Sprint tack, sprint behavior as toggle, aim down sight behavior as hold, and equipment behavior as hold as well as steady aim and automatic weapon fire behavior. Interact reload behavior we have as tap to reload, as it's quicker, and scoreboard behavior as toggle. So that's it for controller settings. Now let's look at the graphics. Firstly, the safe area, obviously just adjust accordingly to your TV or monitor. Game brightness, we suggest leaving this somewhere near 50, maybe 55, maybe 45, but somewhere near the middle, and then adjust your TV or monitor accordingly. Just to show you, for example, if I go too high, the game looks super flat and washed out, and if it's too low, it's so dark that you can't really see anything. So we want to be somewhere near the middle, so I'm going to go with 55. Color customization lets you change the color of yourself, enemy, and teammates, which is a great feature, but remember to keep the colors very obviously different. Otherwise, you'll struggle when looking at the mini-map to distinguish who's on your team and who's against you. So play around with these colors and just find something that works. Next, field of view is an interesting one, and I like to sit around the 100, 105 mark, but again, just have a play around and see what you like. If you have a low field of view, like 60, as I'll show you guys now, the game looks super zoomed in, and when it's at 120, you'll see so much more of the map as it's really wide. But just bear in mind that enemy players are far more difficult to see at a distance with a field of view at 120 when you're really zoomed out. And with a super tight field of view at like 60, for example, enemy players way off in the distance will be much bigger targets, but short range you won't see anywhere near as much. So I'd suggest going somewhere in the middle, around the 100 to 105 mark, but just have a play around with this and see what works best for you. Next, I leave the ADS field of view as affected. Camera movement, we want at least 50%, which means the camera shake movement is as reduced as possible. We want world motion blur off, weapon motion blur off, and I'll show you a quick example between the two with them both being on and off, just so you can see the difference. Now basically, I want this off because I want everything to stay nice and sharp. Depth of field we want off, and this one here, scene rendering sharpness, we're leaving off. The game looks great without it on, and I don't really want it to affect the performance of the game, especially if it's not necessary. On-demand texture streaming, I leave this off. If you have an unlimited internet without a download limit, then maybe give this a try. It basically delivers more detail and color and texture, but I think the game looks good enough without it. So heading over to audio now, I like to have the master at 100 and the music off, so at 0. Next, we want the dialogue volume low, around 15, so you can still hear the useful in-game voiceovers without it distracting from enemy footsteps and everything else. And sound effects we want at 100 with hit marker a little bit lower, again around about 40 or so. Again, we want to hear that our shots are registering, but we don't want them too loud so that we can't hear anything else going on. A cool feature is that you can now change the hit marker sound effect if you want to do that, so you can choose like a more classical hit marker sound. Moving down, choose your desired audio mix depending on your setup, and if you're playing at night, you have a specific night mode which has a lower dynamic range when you want to be a little bit quieter. Killstreak music we have on, and if we're using headphones, we'll keep mono audio off so we can hear footsteps of enemy players directionally, but if you're hard of hearing in one ear or only using one headphone, switch this to on. Voice chat we're leaving on and not really changing anything else, as this is all personal preference. And finally, under interface, you have some text and subtitle settings where you can increase the text size, choose to have subtitles on or off, and I prefer to have them on. Size is at default and 0 opacity. Next, text chat settings are all personal preference, but if you prefer to have censored words in the text chat, then you have the option here. Under the telemetry heading, I like to see my latency and packet loss as well as system clock. You'll see this appears in the top left of the screen, and I like to know what's going on with those and if I'm having any trouble with latency and so on. But these other couple of options are just all personal preference. Now, very importantly, under HUD elements, you absolutely want the square minimap. You get far more coverage than the round one. I think it's something like an extra 27% or so you can see where more teammates and enemy players are. Just choose the square minimap, trust me. Minimap rotation I have on, so I'm always facing north and the minimap rotates around me. Crosshair bobbing I have off because I want the crosshairs to remain central and not start deviating over the screen whenever I fire a gun. Compass text is personal, so it's up to you if you'd rather have numbers or letters. I'm leaving mine on letters, and these bottom two, I just want these left on. And there we have it. As you can see, there is so much detail to this game now, it's incredible. You could spend hours tweaking and adjusting these settings until you find something that works for you, but I'd strongly recommend trying these settings out first and then making tweaks where necessary. So on the whole, it's a pretty predictable but thoroughly enjoyable Call of Duty this year. It ticks all of the boxes of what you would want from a Call of Duty game, but has maybe missed the opportunity to add a new feeling of true adventure, and I'm not sure how many times we can keep revisiting World War II before it starts to feel a little bit overdone. Having said that, I've really enjoyed playing it this last week. There's some pretty cool new features, particularly in multiplayer mode, and although to some this may feel like just another copy of something we've seen and played before, I've really enjoyed this rendition. If you guys have enjoyed this overview of the new Call of Duty Vanguard and want to see some more Call of Duty content on our channel, then please let us know down in the comments below. And if you've got any tips for best settings or anything like that, then please let us know. Thank you guys very much for watching, and we'll see you all next time.